I'd like to officially thank you and welcome you to this year's iMoot. Jeremy Hopkins from Birmingham City University, talking about building a managed learning environment. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Vinny. Okay, so as Vinny said, my name's Jeremy. I work in CICT at Birmingham City University in the UK. So I guess welcome to iMoot. I've sort of made this presentation really for sort of more experienced Moodlers who are interested in developing their system, but also people that are just starting out, maybe thinking about how they want to plan things. I'm not planning on using desktop sharing in this session, but I've put links throughout the presentation to videos and other things if you want to have a look at some of the walkthroughs. We'll just check that you open this in a new tab so that you don't jump a big blue button out to another location. So a little bit about myself and what we've done at this university. They've used Moodle here since 2003. I think it was first installed, and I think it was literally the case that somebody installed it, if not under their desk, certainly in an office on a spare server that they had at that time. And they evaluated it, and then around about 2004 it became supported by CICT. And I joined a few years later in 2007, specifically to work on Moodle at that time. And over the years, that sort of infrastructure and the number of systems we use has grown. So just thought I'd sort of pose the question, what is an MLE? Because quite often we see the term VLE, LME, LMS used interchangeably. And whilst VLE and LMS, sort of virtual learning environment and learning management system, you could use interchangeably, you see quite a distinction between that and a managed learning environment. So Moodle is VLE or LMS, and that's kind of become a central application in our managed learning environment for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Moodle is the oldest and by far the most heavily used. But also because it integrates with so many other applications. So we've integrated with Course Portal, which I'll show you a little bit later, a content repository, some content creation tools, Mahara, which some of you may use, which is really good for a kind of e-portfolio system or more of a student-led environment as opposed to Moodle, which is more instructor-led. Kaltura for serving videos, and in fact a lot of the videos that are embedded in the iMoot course that I've created for this session are actually hosted on our Kaltura instance. Big Blue Button, which we're using now, and we actually recently started using Blindside Network Service for that, the same service we're using now. So if you want to get up and running quickly with Big Blue Button with a managed service, it's well worth talking to Fred Dixon, who's in the room at the moment. And another system is Lecture Capture, which also integrates with Moodle, which I won't talk about much about these applications for the rest of this session. But this is just really to sort of illustrate, the sort of growing number of applications that have been largely built around Moodle because all of these things already integrated with it. So the M in MLE is for managed, and sort of really want to stress that point because combining different applications, as I showed on the previous slide, it extends your learning environment, but it doesn't help you manage it. And as I and some of my colleagues see, it's really workflows and integration with management information systems or student record systems that really give you the kind of management layer that you need. Certainly need as you start to scale. So as I mentioned previously, we started using Moodle in 2003. This is an old screenshot that I managed to dig out from the Moodle system as it was then in 2004 when the university went by a different name at that time. And this is how it looks now. So can't really put this in a single screenshot anymore, but this is Moodle here. There's a direct link to the PDF if that's not entirely clear here. Again, open that in a new tab, or you might be jumped out of Big Blue Button. So you can see Moodle now is very much a part of something much bigger, and this is one of the recent additions that we're working on now, the idea that this is driven from student record system or management information systems. So this kind of organic growth from, the simple Moodle installation in 2004 was really driven by academics. Moodle was first installed by academics, and this is an old comment from an academic dating back to that time, where he says the great thing about Moodle is that it doesn't push users in any particular direction. A lot of software says to me, this is what you need to do, but Moodle says, what do you need to do? And this is really one of the strengths of Moodle, and the reason it became so widely adopted and grew was that level of flexibility. And as more academics started using it and students liked it, it really just went from there, really. It took on a life of its own. But along with that kind of organic growth were some growing pains as well. Because of the way it grew and it was kind of unplanned, we had issues with performance. We have spikes around sort of enrollment, which for us is around about sort of September, October. October's our busiest time of the year. So you can imagine Moodle growing progressively throughout the year, but then you have these spikes around October, and that caught us out a couple of times. There were issues with authentication, with LDAP not always being reliable, and as we added more applications, the fact that people had to keep logging into different applications. The content wasn't particularly well managed, particularly in older versions of Moodle. Moodle 2 does a much better job of being able to reuse files and avoid duplication. But you still have this problem where content can be locked in the course. It's not available to other people necessarily that might be able to use that or repurpose it. But the biggest challenge we've had recently was the kind of unstructured nature of the courses, where they're not in line with the student record system. Now, the reality is that a lot of them are actually fairly in line with this, purely because it makes sense for lecturers to create Moodle courses that correspond with modules in the student record system. But it's not structured in a way that we could integrate. The relationship wasn't sort of tightly defined. It wasn't part of a process or a workflow. And some of the other issues around that are essentially that everything in Moodle is done manually. So enrollments is one. So a lecturer creates their course and then they have to enroll students on that somehow, whether it's an enrollment key or maybe a CSV upload. And then sometimes they may set the wrong date in their enrollment. So students, or in some cases other lecturers, are unenrolled from the course when they shouldn't be. We can't get grades back out of Moodle. We can't clear down old courses reliably. Again, we have to rely on people doing that manually, which doesn't work very well. And we can't clear down old assignments. And as we move towards 100% e-submission, then assignments start to become perhaps 85% of your storage, or our storage is actually assignments. So we would have hundreds of thousands of assignments a year now. This graphic just gives kind of an illustration of the amount of traffic we get, with around 13,000 unique visits and 105,000 page views per day. This was taken last month, which wasn't the busiest time of the year. And this grows year on year. Even after using Moodle for 10 years, each year surpasses the last in terms of its usage. And this came from a presentation an academic gave, or a kind of report they produced, which gives some stats: 1 million quiz questions and 54,000 forum posts in 12 months. So these are quite nice numbers, but when you compare that to the number of students we have, which is around 20,000, then that's less than 3 forum posts per student per year. So we expect this to keep growing for quite some time. And we think that some of the integration that we've been working on will actually help drive Moodle usage. So, sorry, if we I'll start to the rest of the presentation sort of run through, some of the things we did about these issues. So the first one would be performance. So when we first set Moodle up, or when it was first supported, we had a very basic setup, one Moodle instance, just a master slave server replicated to give high availability. But if we wanted to increase capacity, we would essentially have to upgrade both of these physical servers, and there's a lead time on this and a cost, and so it's very difficult to react to increases in demand. So this is what we have now. So Moodle's load balanced here, as is Mahara. This is slightly out of date. We added another web front end to Mahara recently, so that's kind of an example of how easy it is for us now to add more, because these are virtualized. So Moodle.org don't typically recommend that you use virtual machines here, but we do, and so far that's worked okay. This storage space here is actually on a SAN, a storage area network, so there's a whole load of other stuff behind this. So although it's represented quite simply here, this is also very scalable. I think there are around 40 terabytes available at the moment, not all allocated to Moodle, but if we need more space, we can get it. The only part of our infrastructure that isn't really sort of scalable in the sense of being able to plug in more resources are the database servers, which are well within their capacity, but we're going to look at clustering these at some point. And then if we needed more database capacity, we could do what we can here, which is just plug more servers in. And so, this has been quite a critical change for us in terms of being able to meet future demand more flexibly. Another issue was authentication. So LDAP was sometimes a bit sticky, and it became increasingly annoying for users as they started to try and move between applications. So these are some of the applications that integrate with SSO, the web applications that is. So whichever one of these applications you go to, you'll be sent back to this single login point. And once you've logged into one application, you can just access all the others and automatically access. So if you log into Moodle, you can see a link to webmail. So we use Outlook, or OWA for the webmail. There's a short video here if you want to kind of get an idea of how that actually works. Oh, sorry, I've missed a bit. There's also an app that hooks into this same service, not through the web interface, but essentially the same sort of identity provider, if you like. And there's some more Moodle integration, or a bit of this app shows some information coming out of Moodle in that app as well. As users move around these systems, the other issue has been lack of consistency between them. So we have this sort of style guide and a common design language, which we're trying to bring applications closer together so that they're more familiar to students and staff as they move between the different applications. But if you've ever worked with Moodle themes, you'll know that you're sort of quite constrained as to what you can actually do with Moodle themes, particularly in the course area. So you can modify blocks, headers, footers, but the course area is quite limited, certainly in terms of changing layouts. But what we have managed to do through SSO is actually move part of our navigation out to a central service. So this is Moodle and this is our university portal, and you'll see this header at the top here is identical, and this actually comes out off the back of a single sign-on service and is embedded with jQuery. so that when you're in Moodle, you can see if you've got calendar events, emails. For students, they can see things like printer credits, library returns, a couple of other bits and pieces. Not too much, because I don't want it to be overwhelming, but I think upcoming assignment deadlines will be another one we add. And as you mouse over this go-to, you see sort of tiled links between, say, our portal, Moodle. For staff, they can use SharePoint and email. And if you mouse over these links here, then you get the navigation for that application. So if I was to mouse over this in the university portal, it would be a different set of links. Within Moodle, you can see here it's Moodle Profile, My Moodle, and Mahara links there. So this is the kind of thing we're working on to try and bring a bit more consistency between applications. Now, our SSO service was developed internally, and it was written in .NET, but it was based on a lot of the processes used in SAML. So for anybody else looking to implement something like that, then there is actually a Moodle plugin for simple SAML, and you can see here SAML can give you this kind of service as a service provider or identity provider. So there is a mechanism to do this yourselves, or using open source software on PHP, if that's something that interests you. The other thing I touched on was managing content, and we use a content repository for that. So there are some standard repositories in Moodle. Alfresco is an open source one that's integrated in core Moodle. Aquila is a commercial one that you may have seen in core Moodle. We use a different one called Intralibrary, and we have multiple Moodle instances at the moment. And if you've ever seen any of the presentations around content repositories in Moodle, you'll know that you can upload content from these different systems into a central repository and get it back out. So somebody in this Moodle instance could upload a file and it could be reused by somebody in this Moodle site. And we also have an integrated content authoring tool which is still under development. So content uploaded through Moodle becomes available for reuse in content packages essentially. And in the case of video, the videos are indexed in the repository, so they're searchable, but the actual files themselves are sent to Kaltura, which is an open source video platform, which we self-host, but you can buy a hosted service from kaltura.com as well. And this has really been very useful. So previously, when staff uploaded videos into Moodle, had all kinds of problems trying to embed them. They had different formats, sort of MP4, WMV files, and sometimes they'd play and sometimes they wouldn't. What Kaltura does is transcode that video. So if you upload, say, a WMV file, it will convert everything to different MP4 profiles, which will play on any device. They'll play on iPhones or iOS, Android, PCs. I should say there's a slight problem with ours at the moment, so that isn't quite working. So that'll be a couple of weeks before we get that fixed. But this was a massive step forward. So if you're working with video, it's well worth looking at that. There are Moodle plugins for Kaltura already, so you don't need all this stuff. You can hook Moodle directly into Kaltura. The only reason we put it behind the repository is because Kaltura doesn't make it that easy to search and reuse things. It's great for uploading a video into one Moodle course. It's great for an individual to be able to find videos that they've produced, but not so good if you want to share it and reuse those videos across your organization. And a couple of other things we were going to look at. This, I should have put a link to this, but this uses something called SWORD, which is a protocol for depositing content into repositories through a web service, so you don't need FTP or database connections. There's already a reference Android application for that, and we're hoping to start hooking more applications into this to make better use of the content and resources that we produce. So again, there's a video on that I made some time ago, which incidentally, most of the videos that and files that are used on the iMoot course and that are linked here were actually uploaded through one of our Moodle systems. So this video was actually uploaded through a Moodle site because it was convenient to do so, although it wasn't embedded in Moodle, and I was able to drop the same link in here. So it kind of gives you an idea of flexibility there. The way the Moodle integration works for the repository is just through the file picker. And unlike some of the other solutions, the one we have uses Moodle's kind of native process, so it's quite familiar and consistent with any other repository types that you might be using. And so we can upload from within Moodle, upload files and use them there and then in that Moodle course, or we can search for existing files, which is what this shows here. This just shows how that content can be reused across different applications. What this is showing is a series of videos which were uploaded by a lecturer, so they're kind of tutorials I use in tutorial sessions. This is the video series which I'm searching on the term that was used in this video series. So I can see them here in Moodle's file picker, I can see them in the repository if I want to find them there, and also in this content authoring tool which I mentioned previously, and there's a link to a video on that later on if you're interested. So these videos could potentially be uploaded in Moodle and reused in this software to produce something different or to build something else around that video. And this does some interesting things where you can actually use the timeline of the video to move content on. So you could have slides attached to a video and then save that back as a content package back into the repository and import that back into Moodle. So this is really kind of our sort of vision for how we want to start using content more flexibly and make better use of the resources that academics produce, because producing these videos, producing good quality resources is very expensive. So having produced those, we really want to try and leverage them. This is just another sort of view of sort of content in MyCat. It doesn't show a video. There's a video on Vimeo if you're interested in that. This was on GitHub for a while, and I'm hoping it will appear back on there. But if anybody's interested in this, then get in touch. So we'd be more than interested to sort of show it to you. And as I say, I'm really hoping that this makes it back onto GitHub at some point. I mentioned that earlier that there's an open source repository if you're interested in this, Alfresco. I think one of the problems with repositories in schools, colleges, sort of smaller Moodle instances is that most of these are built in Java. The one we use is Java Alfresco. DSpace is another open source one, is in Java. There's one in Perl, and this really I think is a barrier to other, organizations implementing something like this. There is something that would probably do the job, which if you're interested in trying to find something similar in PHP, which is open source, you could have a look at CDMS. It doesn't integrate with Moodle at the moment, but I did speak to the developer a while back to see if it'd be possible. So if people are interested in trying to implement that kind of thing on a smaller scale in PHP, then I don't know, maybe at some point it'd make a good candidate for a kind of crowd funding project perhaps. So I just thought I'd mention that. But I think the big problem in terms of creating the managed learning environment was really the sort of course management side of it, because as I mentioned earlier, the kind of organic growth of our system meant that to a point Moodle diverged from other systems, or even if it didn't diverge, it wasn't close enough to use reliably. Which is what I'm saying here. It became impossible to reliably map the two systems, and everything we looked at really relied on human intervention. It would rely on academics going into one or other system an updating record. So, for example, updating the ID field in a Moodle course to reference something in another system, and you just can't rely on this being done. People forget, they make mistakes, or it's very, very difficult to make something like that work. So when we started looking at automated solutions, then the examples we saw that looked viable, they all provisioned Moodle courses from the other system. That is to say that they weren't creating the courses in Moodle, they were creating them in another system or doing something to initiate course creation. And this is really the way that we decided to approach it. What this means in Moodle is that we're essentially taking these processes out of Moodle and moving some of them, or at least the control of these processes, into another system. So course creation and rollover is one. User creation, we didn't manually create users in Moodle. They're automatically created, but only when the user logged in for the first time, and that presents problems for lecturers wanting to enroll new students, that the lecturer has to wait for the student to access Moodle before they can give them access to the course. And so we will be creating users through Moodle Web Services, as well as enrolling and unenrolling students on those courses based on information in the student record system. And when we say unenrollment, we're actually using the suspend process, because from what we've read, this looks, if somebody makes a mistake, then you don't actually remove somebody from the course with this process, so you can get them back more reliably if a mistake's made in the student record system. And the other big one for us is being able to archive courses before deleting them. So by archiving, we really mean make a course read-only, and we want to do that so that invigilators or external organisations that we work with sometimes want to go back and do some kind of validation on our courses, and they like to know that they're looking at the course as it was at the time it ran. But beyond that, clearing down courses. So the Moodle instance we've got now, it was rebuilt in 2008, and we've still got stuff from 2008 in our Moodle system. And as you scale, you really need to be able to clear that back down to free up storage and resources. So this is another sort of important part of this process for us. And to try and enforce all this, we will actually be removing some of these capabilities from users in Moodle. Now, there will be exceptions to that, but what we mean by this is that the standard teacher or... Sorry. Sorry about that. The standard teacher role within Moodle won't have the ability to enroll users, for example. They would go into the student record system to do that. And in fact, it should already be done, but if there were corrections, changes needed to be made, that would be where they would do it. And that means that the student record system, the integrity of that system's improved, and there's only one place that we need to update things rather than having to update student record system and Moodle. And where there are exceptions, then we will be creating other Moodle roles, which Moodle, another strength of Moodle is the fact that you can create highly granular roles with different permissions. So for sort of ad hoc courses, we will have slightly different roles that are closer to the standard Moodle roles, if that makes sense. And I think at first, the sort of first pass of this, we're hoping to catch around 70% of our courses to put through this kind of process initially. So we'll never get to 100% of Moodle courses. We think we'll get to 100% of the courses in the student record system, but at the first sort of pass, we're aiming for about 70%. And this is how that process has been designed. So SITS is our student record system, and there's a service here that we can monitor for changes to enrolments, so students being added to or removed from a module as they're referred to in SITS. So a module in our student record system becomes a course in Moodle. There's another sort of step to this, which we've called Your Course, or the course portal, which is a web interface. And this is where a lecturer can go in and do the things that they need to kind of roll over their Moodle courses, things that don't exist in here. So we take information from this system and we start to build on it in this system, in this course portal. So one of the processes to manage teachers, so assign teaching, not editing teaching roles to the course. And this is a direct link straight into Moodle through Moodle's web service. So these changes are instant, they go straight to Moodle. But course duplication requests, so the process we're using is always to duplicate an existing course, never to create a Moodle course from scratch. So we would either be rolling over or duplicating a template if it was a brand new course. So it'd be kind of an empty template with placeholders in it. Or it would be the previous year's course, or maybe another course that was very similar that you were going to use that as a starting point. So we always duplicate courses rather than creating empty ones. And these requests go into a queuing system, because if you've ever, the Moodle process or web service for duplicate a course uses Moodle's backup and restore feature. And if you've ever used that, you'll know that it can take some time and it's not always entirely reliable. There are things you can do to improve that. One of the issues actually with rolling over courses, when you've got things stored on a SAN, or as we have, you've got clustered servers pointing at the central storage location, is that Moodle's temporary storage, if that doesn't exist on the web server itself, I think there are about 6 read-write that go across the network. So we have another virtual machine set up to handle course backup and restore. So that's one, if you're suffering from that problem, that's something to look at. But the point is that this being a demanding process goes through a scheduler and they're run overnight. So the course creation process runs overnight and it duplicates the course, it verifies that that process is completed, and then it enrolls all of the students onto that course. And at this point, all of the students that are on that module at the time are enrolled at the point the course is duplicated. But subsequently, any changes just come through very quickly. So although the initial enrolment's tied to this queue, subsequent changes, so students being added or removed after the event, move through this process much more quickly. They're not tied up in this queue. This is a look at this sort of Your Course interface, or a part of it. Again, there is actually a sort of video walkthrough which was produced by a colleague. It's on a beta system, but it gives you an idea of a better idea of how this fits together. But essentially, when an academic or a module leader, who is the person assigned to the course in the student record system, comes in to view a particular course, they have this option to create Moodle course. And on clicking that, the first thing that they're asked to do is to find a Moodle course to clone or to copy. So this information is actually coming out of a Moodle test system here. And it's Ajax, so as you type, it starts to refine the list. So you choose either an existing course from a previous year or a template. And the idea is that if we know the SIPS module, or a module from the student record system, then this can be made a bit smarter than it is here to actually suggest the previous year's courses, for example. Once you've chosen the course, it will update this, again pulling all this information from Moodle. So it's going to get the existing Moodle category that the course that you're copying was in, but you would have the option to change it if you want to put it into a different category. And it gives you the course ID, the category ID, the full name, short name, and the summary also coming out of Moodle. And then you have the option to clone this course or to create the duplicate copy of it. And once that process is completed, which takes a few seconds, you see it in a pending status. So this is waiting for the overnight job to complete. So for the rest of that day, it would remain in a pending status. And at this point, if a lecturer realizes they've made a mistake, they can delete it from the queue, because nothing has happened in Moodle yet. So you can simply delete this, and this goes away, and you can start again. Once the overnight job has run and the Moodle course has been created, then the view changes to this, and instead of seeing a link here, so this says course being cloned to give you a reference back to the course you're copying, it changes to the newly created course. And you could see here that the teachers are assigned. So this would be the module leader initially, and the module leader then sees this manage button here, and from here they would go in and add teachers. So there'll be another option here to choose the role that you want to assign. So whether it's teacher, non-editing teacher, or some other roles that we might want to use, and you would add the teacher in this system rather than Moodle, or indeed remove anybody that you wanted to. And as I mentioned earlier, this is pretty much instant. They're almost instantly added to that course in Moodle. And so what we're trying to do in the the rollout of this system in the next few months is to automate rollover and course creation. One of the biggest complaints from academics here has always been, well, why can't you being CICT, automate this process? You know, it takes a long time for academics to roll over their courses at the end of each year and then enroll the students. And it's the busiest time of year. They have a lot of other things to be doing at that time. But I think the biggest win is probably in terms of student satisfaction, because at the moment when a new student joins the university, they don't exist in Moodle until they log in, and they can be waiting a week or two until they've got access to all the things that they need in Moodle. And one of the sort of real benefits for us was to say that the first time a student ever logs into Moodle, that they've got everything there. They can go to My Moodle and see all of their courses. Or I think from Moodle, certainly from Moodle 2.6, you can customize there's a setting so that you, on the front page of Moodle, rather than showing categories, you can just show their courses that are enrolled, which is kind of a hybrid between My Moodle and the sort of previous category list in Moodle. So the point is that they can just come in and everything is already there for them. And Moodle courses that they're on also show in the mobile app, and some integration with other systems link back to their Moodle courses as well. So they'll be steered in that direction as they move through other systems that are also integrated. We also think that it will encourage the use of Moodle. So Moodle is very widely used and used on the vast majority of courses, but we think putting it into a workflow will sort of push Moodle further. The few courses that don't use it, I think, hopefully that will drive adoption there. And as we sort of tighten up the integration and make things easier, that kind of removes some of the barriers to using Moodle more effectively. And the other thing is around things like course documents, so module guides and assignment briefs. These often exist in multiple places, so they quite often exist in SharePoint, for example, or some other system, and then they are uploaded to the course portal, and then because students want them in their Moodle page, they're uploaded to Moodle. So we're working on blocks at the moment, Moodle blocks, to pull in information about the module leader, links back to their course documents, and links back to their Your Course page on the course portal. I haven't really explained what that Your Course page actually does, but it is to give students a view of their degree course as a whole, so that they can see where they are on each of their modules or within the year, and see all of their grades coming out of the student record system. And so it's kind of more of a management tool, if you like, for students to plan their wider study, rather than it just being a kind of another view of Moodle, if that makes sense. The idea isn't to replicate what Moodle does, it's to give a high-level view of their degree course, which Moodle doesn't really do as it stands. Moodle does a good job of teaching the individual modules, but it doesn't kind of give them this high-level view of the course with the grades and other information that goes with it. So that was really the point of this sort of course portal, and Moodle and course portal will over time become more closely integrated. So the things that we haven't done yet are the automated archiving, making previous courses read-only, the automated deletion and clear down. Clearing down expired users is another one that bloats your database tables. And again, that's difficult to do in Moodle unless you can be very sure that that person has indeed completed the course. And so with this sort of tighter integration between systems, this is something else we'll start to look at. The big challenge is really going to be integrating assignments, how you map assignments which are shown in the course portal, so they have the deadlines coming out of a student record system, and how you get the grades back out. And we will probably have to do a similar kind of creation mapping kind of exercise with assignments along the lines of the work we've done with creating courses. And then that allows us to detect the submission status. So if you remember when I was talking about the navigation toolbar earlier with the little icons, until if you've got an email, then it'd be nice to be able to show pending assignments across other applications outside of Moodle. So if a student hasn't been into Moodle, they'd still see they've got an assignment pending, and obviously you'd need the icon to disappear once the assignment was submitted. And getting grades out of Moodle is another big one, because at the moment assignments are graded in Moodle, but then getting those grades out of Moodle back into a student record system is not well automated. Well, not automated at all, really. And another one is analytics. So there are some Moodle plugins for sort of user analytics, and there's some work being done in that area. Again, Moodle's just one system, and it probably has more data on student participation than any other system, but there are other systems that are relevant. So we have attendance monitoring, which was brought in largely because of the UK border agency and international students, but attendance is monitored for all students, not just international students. So we've got that information. We can get stats out of Mahara and various other systems, and at some point try and bring all this together into one place so that analytics from Moodle and all the other systems are visible together. And this is particularly interesting to some academics because they like to identify students that might be struggling or, potentially thinking of dropping out of their course, so that they can speak to them and see if they need any help, or, maybe they want to change some of their modules. So this is another thing that we'll be looking at in the future. And everything that we've sort of just, or I've just discussed about this integration has been made possible by Moodle's web services. So when I last looked, Moodle 2.6 had 84 web services, and support for multiple protocols. And really this has really been the enabler for us to do all of this. And I mention this because I've seen on Moodle.org sometimes people say, why are you wasting your time creating web services when you could be doing something else? Well, if you want to kind of move Moodle on from just being the VLE to, a sort of central component in something bigger, then this stuff's really important. That's really why I've just added this slide to make that point, really, that it is important, as is the sort of roles feature in Moodle, which is another side of Moodle. I've seen some people comment, well, Moodle HQ spent all this time building out this complex role structure that we didn't need, and we'd have rather had something else instead. But again, it sort of really is important when you try and integrate with other applications. And if you want to learn more about the Moodle web services, you can kind of follow this link here, you'll see there's a web service for course duplication. And, you know, if you read through this list, you'll be able, you should be able to see pretty easily the kind of services that we're using in our integration. And so in summary, sort of, or it's perhaps not a summary, but just kind of some thoughts really on the process we went through between sort of 2003 and 2014 is that in 2003, when Moodle first became used at this university, nobody really knew where it would go. It was very new. I don't know if anybody even really expected to be still using it 10 or 11 years later. And it was very much allowed to grow organically. It was just tested. It was cheap. The software was free. It wasn't costing much to host, and it was just kind of thrown out there for people to use. Now, that did have the benefit in that it was low cost because we just bought hardware that we needed at that time, but it created a few problems. One was it created a perception that Moodle is free or cheap. Well, it is free software, and it is very cheap to deploy Moodle compared to commercial alternatives, but it's not free, and it does require some investment if you want to have a system that performs and do things in a more sustainable way. And in particular, spikes in demand can be really problematic if you haven't got scalable infrastructure. So the intake of students can change from year to year. As I've said, our Moodle instance is still growing after 10 years. Each year it's used more and more heavily than the year before. And that, coupled with the kind of spikes as we move through the year, did catch us out before we had this kind of more distributed infrastructure. And certainly if you're starting out with Moodle, that's something you really want to consider. And the other thing is that trying to introduce these kind of control structures and integration later on is very difficult, because once people have started doing things a certain way, it's quite difficult to try and change that sort of behavior. If something's working for somebody already, why would they want to change it? That's a particular problem with the content side of things, in terms of trying to get people to put their content in an area that it can be reused by other people, when historically they've just uploaded it straight to Moodle. So again, if you're starting out, it does make more sense to try and think about some of these things earlier on, and have a bit of a plan, and have a bit of money to take a more structured approach. It certainly, I think, would pay off in the long term. I think if we had been able to follow that approach, which we couldn't have in 2003, but I think we'd have moved forward a lot faster than we did. So that's the end of this presentation. So I hope you found it useful. I don't know if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask on this. Oh, I'm sorry. I've started to reply on text to to Tim, and forgot that I could just talk to you. Yeah, so Tim's asking how many developers we have. We don't have many PHP developers. Most of our applications here were written in .NET or in C#, and the course portal was written in C#. So yeah, you say we've done a lot. The course portal was based on something that had been done just by one faculty a few years ago, so there was some experience with that. And most of the stuff that's used already existed, so it's really been a case of stitching it together. And the big change really was some of the web services that became available in Moodle 2.5. I can't remember which one specifically. It's really been the expansion of web services that's made all this possible. Without that, we wouldn't have had the resources to start trying to build all that ourselves. So it really has been, the availability of those web services that have allowed us to do it with the resources that we have. I think in terms of Tim's question earlier on, saying that assumes you know what you need to do. I think when we started, Moodle was very new and nobody really knew where that was going to go. I think at this point in time, then there are lots of precedents out there. And interestingly, there are still some universities that don't have a learning management system at all. There are still a few out there that are trying to work with things like SharePoint. And we actually had a visit from some people from a university that had been using SharePoint. So they came and saw what we've done and said, right, well, yes, we want something like that. Or Sussex University have done a lot with Moodle. So, I think it is a lot easier to get an idea of what you might want to do now than it was in 2003. I don't know if anybody, do I need to enable people's mics for them to be able to talk, Vinny, or? How many Moodle roles do we have? Too many, probably, and we have too many administrators as well. So I'm just trying to think. We have things, there used to be one called See All Do Nothing, is how I saw that referred to on Moodle.org. So these are kind of external auditors of a kind. 50 roles, well, that is a bit crazy. We're trying to trim down our roles and standardize them. Yeah, I've seen your Moodle instance. Somebody here is doing a course at the OU, so I got them to log me in and let me go for a wander, and it's nice what you've got, the OU, and nice that you've got so many developers as well. But yeah, we're trying to reduce and standardize the number of roles, to be honest. And we don't think we need anywhere near 50. I'm guessing we'll probably come in at maybe 4 or 5 roles in addition to the standard Moodle roles. Yeah, I think in terms of needing them all, I mean, you only really need one role, don't you, which is an administrator. If you give everybody that, you can use one role. So I think it would be fair to say there are people in our system that have got access to do more than they should. I think one of the biggest problems for us is that the admin permissions aren't granular in the way that the kind of general user roles like teacher, student, everything around those roles is granular, but the admin section is, there's a particular capability, I think, which essentially allows you to do everything, and without that capability, you lose things that are useful. So I don't know where that will go. But I think, the role system is really important in Moodle. And as I said, I have seen comments on Moodle.org questioning the amount of resources that were put into that. But as you grow, that really isn't essential that you have that. Has anybody else got any questions?
This is Vinny from the iMoot team. So Jeremy doesn't adhere to getting more questions. So just once again, thank you very much for presenting. Really, really interesting. And enjoy the rest of the iMoot.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks everybody for turning up. So maybe see you again in another presentation over the next day or so. Okay then, I'm going to log out now then, so goodbye.